What a devil of a hurry they were in! I knew I should never catch up with them. The beautiful ruins of Reims soon spread beneath my right wing. My machine was certainly not as fast as either Lufbery's or Campbell's. I continued to hang back far behind my formation. The lines of the enemy were approaching, and Lufbery, my only salvation as it appeared to me, was at least a mile ahead of me. I shall believe to my dying day that Major Lufbery knew my thoughts at that moment, for just as I felt that he had forgotten all about me, he suddenly made a virage, and took up a position a few hundred feet from me, as much as to say, "Don't worry, my boy, I have an eye on you." Again and again this occurred. It was with great difficulty that I tried to perform the same manoeuvres that Major Lufbery executed with such great ease. I grew somewhat interested with my attempts to imitate his example in preserving our little flight formation, and this occupation of keeping within shouting distance of my companions made me forget entirely that old Mother Earth was some 15,000 feet underneath me, and the trenches about the same distance ahead. The bitter, numbing cold which always prevails at these high altitudes was, of course, by this time an old and familiar experience to me. We had been sailing along at this dizzy height for some 30 minutes between Reims and the Argonne woods, when it occurred to me to look below at the landscape. And such a spectacle spread itself out before my eyes when I at last did look over the side of my little office. The trenches in this sector were quite old and had remained in practically the same position for 3 years of warfare. To my inexperienced view there appeared to be nothing below me but old battered trenches, trench works, and billions of shell holes, which had dug up the whole surface of the earth for 4 or 5 miles on either side of me. Not a tree, not a fence, no sign of any familiar occupation of mankind, nothing but a chaos of ruin and desolation. The awfulness of the thing was truly appalling. Perhaps this feeling got the best of me for a moment. I don't know of what Campbell was thinking, and I suppose Major Lufbery was far too accustomed to the situation to give a thought to it. But just when I had gained enough equilibrium of mind to keep my place in formation, and at the same time take an interest in the battlefields below me, I began to feel a terrible realization that seasickness had overcome me. A stiff wind was blowing all this time, and no ship upon the high sea ever rolled and pitched more than my baby Newport did, this 15,000 feet above no man's land, while I was attempting to follow Major Lufbery's evolutions and maneuvers. I didn't want to confess even to myself that I could get sick in the air. This was what would be expected from a brand new aviator on his first trip over the lines. It would be wonderfully amusing to Lufbery and the rest of the boys in the squadron when I got back to the field, if I ever did, to advise me to take along a bottle of medicine next time I tried to fly. I grew cold with the thought of it. Then I set my teeth and prayed that I might fight it off. I determined to look straight ahead and fly straight ahead, and to concentrate my whole mind on the task of sticking it out, no matter how I felt. I had hardly got control of myself when I was horribly startled by an explosion which seemed only a few feet in my rear. I didn't even have time to look around, for at the same instant the concussion caught my plane and I began to roll and toss much worse than I had ever realized was possible. The very terror of my situation drove away all thoughts of sickness. In the midst of it several more shocks tipped my machine, and repeated sounds of nearby explosions smote my ears. No matter what happened, I must look around to see what awful fate was overtaking me. All that I could see were 4 or 5 black puffs of smoke, some distance behind and below my tail. I knew what they were right enough. They were Archie. They were 18-pound shells of shrapnel which were being fired at me by the Germans, and the battery which was firing them was only too well known to me. We had all been told about the most accurate battery that Allied aviators had met in this sector. It was situated just outside the town of Sweep, and there was Sweep down there just under my left wing. A mile north of Sweep was the exact location of this famous shooting battery. I looked down and picked it out quite clearly, and I knew they could see me and were seeing me much more plainly than I was seeing them, and probably they had quite a few more of those shells on hand which they were contemplating popping up at me. I shall never forget how scared I was and how enraged I felt at the old pilots at home who pretended to like the Archies. The latter were bursting all around me again and were terribly close, and I felt a vengeful desire to get home just once more in order to take it out on those blasé pilots, who had been telling us newcomers that anti-aircraft guns were a joke and never did any damage. They used to count up the cost of each shell at $5 or $10 apiece, and then figured that they had cost the German government about $1 million for their morning's amusement in flying over the Archie batteries with never a hit. And I had been fool enough to believe them. Any one of those shells might happen to hit me just as well as happen to burst 100 yards away. It was due entirely to my own good luck, and not at all to those scoffers' silly advice, that one of them hadn't hit me already. I was more indignant with the boys who had been stuffing me with their criminal wit than I was with the Boche gunners who were firing at me. Never before did I, and never again will I, quite so